Hey guys, welcome to our second episode of Square One Basics. Last time we talked about composition, or how we frame our shot. Today we're going to be talking about shutter speed. Shutter speed affects a few different things inside your camera, but primarily light and motion. So on the camera we've got the lens and then the camera body. We're going to be talking about lenses in a later episode, so I'm not going to talk about that right now. When you take off your cap, you've got your glass in here, and the light travels through and then hits the shutter way back here. So what happens when you press this little guy right here, this little button, it opens up the shutter. And you can control how long that shutter stays open. In the old days, when the shutter would open up, it would allow a certain amount of light to come in to expose the film. So that's called our exposure. How much light you let in is called exposure. So if it opens up for a long time, it exposes the photo for a long time, ends up lightening it up a lot. If you open it real quick, then it only lets in a little bit of light at a time. So there are different occasions when you want to use the different shutter speeds. Now instead of using film, these cameras use a sensor. It's the same principle though. Now on every camera it's a little different on where you find your shutter speed. On mine, this is a Canon T4i. This is part of the Rebel series. It's a really good budget camera. The problem is it's a little bit cheaper, so after some time I've had some issues with my sensor getting a little fuzzy. But overall, good camera, I like it. I have a preference with Canon just because it's what I learned on. Nothing against Nikon. Nikon produces fantastic cameras. I'm just used to Canon. I like the interface, it's simple, and if you hand me a Nikon, I won't know how to navigate it. So when I turn on my camera, I'll see it pop up right here on the screen. You'll see a lot of numbers and symbols, and it's kind of confusing at first, but after a while you'll get it. It'll take time. Shutter speed is measured in the amount of seconds that the shutter is open. Right now you see my camera is set for 1/100th. That means it's going to open and close in 1/100th of a second. Now that might seem pretty fast, but my camera can go up to 1/4000th of a second. So in all reality, there are other cameras that can go even faster. And then you can even slow down your shutter speed all the way to bulb. And what that means is as long as you're holding down that button, that shutter is going to stay open. So you can do some cool things with that, specifically starlight photography. Now to change my shutter speed, there's a dial right here, and I can slow it down and I can speed it up, just like that. Very simple. The question is when to use a slower or faster shutter speed. It comes in two different things, about motion and light. First, let's talk about light. Have you ever taken a photo in a dark setting, maybe a bowling alley or something, and it's always blurry? The reason for that is your camera is on an automatic setting and it's trying to compensate for the amount of light that's in there. Remember when I talked about that shutter? So what it's doing is since there's a little bit of light, it tries to open up to absorb as much light as it can before it finally closes. So what ends up happening is while that's open and a subject moves just ever so slightly from this point to this point, it captures all of the light that's reflecting off that subject from here to here. So you get a blur that's happening. Even if they're not moving, you're going to be moving your camera just a little bit. You might think you're totally still, but the slower your shutter is, just every little bit of movement is going to make it look blurry. So if you're doing night photography or doing photography in a very dark setting, you have to have a tripod because you've got to make sure that while that shutter's open, your camera is not moving. Now in the contrast, when you're outside and it's bright noonday, you're going to want a faster shutter speed because you don't want it to stay open and let in tons of light because you already have a whole lot of light going on out here. So you only want it to open up and close really fast. So when it's dark, slow shutter speed. When it's bright, fast shutter speed. Now, I've already talked a little bit about blurring. So once again, if that shutter's open for a long time, things are going to blur as they move. So is this a bad thing? Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. On 4th of July, everybody tries to take these shots with sparklers. You move it around really fast and you try to draw your name or a heart or something cheesy like that. You pull up your camera as everybody's waving their sparklers around and you take your picture. When your camera is trying to compensate for the amount of darkness, or if you're using a manual setting with a slower shutter speed, it opens up and it catches that blur, all of that motion, and you can write anything in the air. The slower the shutter speed, the more you'll be able to put in there. You've also seen those really cool shots of cars driving by and you can see the taillights streaming behind them. That's a slow shutter speed. So there's a matter of style. You can even focus in on a subject, take your picture, and as the shutter's opening up, zoom in or zoom out just a little bit. Get this cool kind of warp look with it. Now say you're at a track meet or a football game and you want to be able to catch someone in the action. This is when you use a faster shutter speed. Because it opens up and closes really fast, it's going to be capturing just that quick glimpse, that millisecond in there. Now be careful because once you start adjusting the speed of your shutter, you might have to adjust some of your other settings. We're going to talk about the other settings later on. But for now, I wanted you to understand the principle of shutter speed and how that affects your photo. So for now, you're going to set it to shutter priority. This means you'll be able to change your shutter speed and the camera will compensate all the other settings, so you don't have to think about them. On the Canon, you'll spin this dial to the TV mark. On a Nikon, it's an S. The TV stands for timing value. On the Nikon, the S stands for shutter speed, which actually makes way more sense. Now, I prefer to shoot in manual, and that's just so I can have more flexibility over all my settings. But as you're kind of figuring out how to use them, it might be better just to use the different priority settings. So in summary, the shutter is what allows light into the camera, and the shutter speed tells the shutter how fast to open and close. If you're shooting in bright settings or you want to capture a crisp action shot, you want to have a faster shutter. If you're shooting in low light or you want to get that motion blur, you want to use a slow shutter. If you guys have any questions, send me an email at squareonebasics@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook or Twitter at squareonebasics.